Welcome back to the channel, Little Flexers. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video. My name is JW Creewall, aka Flex Daddy. This is a video all about the European International Championships. Now, this was the first tournament in the new post-rotation format, battle styles, to the newly released Scarlet and Violet expansion. There was a huge shakeup of the metagame, and in today's video, we're gonna run down the top 8 decks, and I'll let you know what I like, what I dislike, and where I see the meta moving on from here. So let's get into it. One of the nice things about being poor is that I didn't have a chance to travel to London for the European International Championships. So I get to cover all the decks before any other content creator. That's kind of cool. Let's take a look at the top 8. Now, this was one of, I think, if not the best series of Pokemon that I had ever seen in the finals match between Tord and Alex. If you haven't had a chance, please do yourself a favor, go back and watch that set because they played fantastically. There were a lot of incredible draws, a lot of incredible plays from both players, with, of course, Alex coming out on top with the victory. I think I may even cover it here on the channel, might cast over that finals match because it's just so good. There's a lot to learn from both players, and for the most part, they played at the top of their game. So here is our top 8 from EUIC. As you can see, there are 7 different decks, with the only repeating deck being the Lugia Archeops. Let's start with number 8. Robert, with his Miraidon deck, was a player that I was watching all through day 1 and day 2 because he started out blazing hot and ended up making a top 8 run. I was so interested in the Miraidon deck because I had been telling people that it was actually a worthy deck in this format. A lot of players laughed me off saying, well, it's too, multi-prize focused. It would never work. It relies on hitting your electric generators. And while all that's true, one of the things that Miraidon does really well, better than any other deck in this format, is it has insane turn ones. You can be hitting for 220 on that first turn of the game if you can find a couple of energy off the generators. And at the very least, you're going to get a Raikou attack most games. So I love it for that reason. I actually host a competitive Pokemon trading card game podcast, and I had a few players on, really good players on, the roundtable episode that we did a couple weeks ago, and they all laughed when I brought up Miraidon. They're like, we are not preparing for this for EUIC. I don't see any of them getting even a top 32. And you know what? I'm just very happy that a Miraidon got top 8 because I said that it would. Looking at the list, the thing that stands out the most to me is, of course, the Cram-O-Matic. We have 3 Cram-O-Matic in this list. And that, it should just be the standard. Try to fit 4 in if you can, because frankly, getting your electric generators on that first turn of the game is so important. Even the second turn, just being able to have access to electric generators when you need the energy acceleration is extremely important. So 3 Cram-O-Matic, you could maybe even squeeze 4 in there. I don't think that that would be bad at all because there are a lot of these items that you can afford to get rid of. Ultra Balls, don't always need them. Nest Balls, don't always need them. All those switching cards, you don't always need them. So Cram-O-Matic is always going to have a target to find you the generator on the turn that you need it. Another nice thing about this list is a very heavy emphasis on the Regieleki Vmax, very much respecting the Regieleki Vmax and how much it can add to your deck. So there's a 4-3 line of Regieleki Vmax. Now, of course, Regieleki Vmax with the Transistor ability allows all your basic lightning Pokemon to do 30 additional damage. So it makes sense that you would want to try to get out all 3 Vmax. So you could potentially hit 310 with the Miraidon EX. Now, the Radiant Pokemon of choice, I've seen some lists without Radiant Pokemon. This list opted for Radiant Greninja, which makes sense, especially with the high count of energy that we see here from Robert. 15 Lightning means that Radiant Greninja is going to fire every turn that there's not a path in play. And that's just going to be that additional draw that you need because, frankly, there's not a ton of draw with this deck. You got your 4 Research, you got your 2 Serena. That's about it. So you're really relying on that Greninja. You're really relying on the strength of the electric generators to be able to bring you home in any matchup that you play. So really nice list. I think this is going to be the standard for Miraidon moving forward. And frankly, I think that Robert really showed that Miraidon can play well with the big boys. It was an unproven deck, really had a lot of haters, wasn't thought very highly of from anyone, except, you know, obviously Robert and the few people that played Miraidon, but I think this is going to be the standard for this type of list moving forward. I think there should be a lot more respect for it in the metagame. Up next is Trevor Reed's Lugia Archeops deck. Not a ton to say here because I do feel like a lot of players know how Lugia functions from last format and kind of understand, well, okay, we're taking out all the cards that we can't use because they rotated and putting in this single strike package that gives us some more options and it covers weaknesses and things in the new format. So we see here from his list that he opted to go for a Duraludon line in addition to the Tyranitar, in addition to the Yveltal and the Stonejourner. So we're getting that kind of tanky ability with the Duraludon being able to shut down any maybe mirror matches that he might have faced. The Skyscraper ability means that this Duraludon can't get hit by Pokemon that have special energy attached. So obviously a mirror tech and all around just bulky Pokemon that can swing through maybe opposing Miltanks or anything that your opponent tries to set up that is kind of funky. That Gmax pulverization goes through any effect on your opponent's Pokemon. Very nice for that. Of course, can hit up to 300 if you attach all 4 single strike energy to it. Not very likely that would happen, but it is an option. We also, of course, have the Tyranitar V. This is going to be your best attacker into the Gardevoir matchup, with pretty much everything in the Gardevoir deck being weak to dark. Tyranitar V can take a lot of big knockouts. Also a really great card into Mew Vmax. You want to make sure if you are playing those decks that you conserve that Tyranitar for the optimal time. We also, of course, have the Yveltal. This is just a 1 prize single strike attacker that can make use of the single strike energy for those matchups that I just mentioned. If you need to even up the prize trade somehow, maybe you fell behind early in the Mew matchup, for instance, throw up an Yveltal, put 3 single strike energy onto it, and go to town with that single strike wings attack, taking 1-shots on their Vmax. Really nice card. Obviously, you want to be playing 1 prizers when you can in a Lugia deck because, like I was saying last format, Lugia is one of the best single prize Pokemon decks, which is kind of funny to say, but it just utilizes single prizers better than pretty much any other deck. We also have Stonejourner here to hit the fighting weakness. That's going to be really good against Arceus-based decks. Giga Hammer is the attack here. During your next turn, this Pokemon can't use Giga Hammer, but presumably you'd get knocked out after you use this attack. Of course, you're going to lose all those single strike energy, so you better make sure that you play a couple of Urn of Vitality. There's 2 in this list to grab those single strike energy, put them right back into the deck so you can accelerate them to another Pokemon. Love this list. Trevor did a great job. 6th place finish. Won't go over the 7th place finishing deck, but this was a nice Lugia list that I think, you know, is really, really interesting going forward. You have the Thornton as well, which is another cute little card to maybe preserve some energy, maybe make some cute plays if you have energy attached in the wrong spots or you want to reuse an attacker. Like this list, this is an A+ for me in terms of Lugia Vstar lists. Next up, we have Aiden Koos, who got 5th place. Funny enough, he was on that roundtable Pokemon discussion I was talking about earlier on the podcast. Yeah, he said that Miraidon was terrible, but I guess he kind of backed up his words by finishing better than the Miraidon player. But here's his Goodra list. Goodra was not a deck that I loved heading into the format, although my good friend Riley and Andrew Mahone both played Goodra, and Michael Zealy also played Goodra. He finished 6-3. Andrew and Riley both made day 2, with Andrew getting a top 64 finish. Obviously, Aiden here is the best placing Goodra from the tournament. It's just a solid overall deck. It just doesn't really do anything special, nothing really fun. You kind of always know what you're getting, as opposed to maybe the Lugia deck. You can splash in some weird attackers like the Duraludon or an Arceus pile deck that could really play a lot of different strategies. This Goodra deck, just trying to set up, trying to hit you for 200 and asking the question, do you have a way to get around or through this Goodra? More than often, you're not going to have a way to go right through the Goodra, so you're going to have to come up with some unusual strategies, and Aiden was able to use that to his advantage to get a top 8 placement. One thing that you're seeing in these lists of Hisuian Goodra Vstar is a couple Melanie. This is a little bit more unusual from the last format, but you still have a couple Melanie in this list to try to draw a few extra cards, get those water energy in play, and really start to ramp up with the Melanie, what I like about it is that you don't have to rely on the Mirage Gates as much. The Goodra deck, it's going to struggle more than other Lost Box decks because it doesn't have the space to devote to all the switching cards that those other decks play. So it's a little better to not have to rely on the Mirage Gate until maybe later in the game. Obviously, you're not going to be able to reuse Comfeys with, the scoop up nets. So you have to make use of your Comfeys. And you don't want to bench too many because then you clog your bench and they're easy prizes for your opponent. So the Melanies allow you to power up a Goodra without necessarily needing the Mirage Gate. So really nice inclusion there from Aiden. Nothing else really to say about the list. I mean, you could certainly point out the Crystal Cave adds a little bit of additional healing. They have a Beach Court as well, one of the new cards from the Scarlet and Violet expansion. That's just going to be kind of standard in this Lost Box package to move around your Comfey. But overall, just pretty much porting over what we had from last format, minus the things that you couldn't play because of rotation. And, again, adding some things that might help you out in terms of getting that engine set up. So, Goodra deck, 5th place. Congratulations to Aiden. This was one of the most stacked top 8s that I think I have ever seen. And the top 4 players were all extremely notable. Now, this is top 4 finisher Pedro Torres with his Lost Box list. Some cool things going on here. I think the biggest thing that I want to point out is that it is a Radiant Charizard based list. What I had been seeing a lot on stream and on Twitter and from people posting before the tournament with tier lists was that the Radiant Charizard version was maybe a little bit worse than some of the other Lost Box variants. I was seeing a lot of hype for Lost Box Giratina Vstar. I was seeing a lot of hype for the Turbo Greninja Dragonite V builds that aim to get a first turn attack. I didn't see a lot of people talking about the Radiant Charizard list. And I don't really know why, because that would have been my first instinct for this new format, is try to make a Radiant Charizard build work. If I found that it had too low of a power level, then maybe dump it in favor of a different Lost Box list. But Pedro was able to utilize this Radiant Charizard based Lost Box deck for a great result. Top 4 at an international championship with this deck. Really, really great. So one of the biggest cards for this deck that it gained with Scarlet and Violet that made it a better deck was this Hawlucha. So this Hawlucha, when you play it from hand to your bench, Flying Entry is the ability. You choose 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon, does 10 damage to each. So what's really nice about the Hawlucha is that it's easier to snipe your opponent's setup Pokemon. So things like the Manaphy that has 70 damage, things like opponent's Ralts that have 70 damage, opponent's Comfey that have 70 damage, all now with a Hawlucha snipe put them down to 60 each, and then you can more easily Sableye for 2 prizes. So Hawlucha, really great card for this deck. Obviously, you can only use it one time because we don't have the scoop up net, but if you have access to Hawlucha at the right time, it's going to be big for you. Really is. So we have this Comfey build that aims to get the Cramorant out early. What you're going to want to do with this deck is get 4 in the Lost Zone as soon as possible. We see Pedro is playing 4 Colress's Experiment. That's a main way to get cards in the Lost Zone. But he's also playing 3 Pokegear. Pretty standard. Again, you're very much wanting to get that first turn Cramorant with this style deck. So it makes sense that he's playing Colress and Pokegear here. But it is just something very important to point out. Now we have the Sableye, of course. That's going to be your kind of mid to late game attacker to really spread damage, set up one-shots with the Radiant Charizard. Combustion Blast could attack for only a single energy as long as your opponent's taken 4 prizes. Now, one of the cool things about this deck that I do want to point out as well are some of the tech Pokemon that he plays. So Pedro plays the Mawile, which was an interesting tech that a lot of people were talking about before the tournament, but we didn't really see in a lot of decks. But Mawile here is really nice for stalling an opponent's Pokemon that maybe can't attack, doesn't have the energy to attack, something like a Radiant Pokemon in a deck that doesn't actually have the energy to use it. So like a Radiant Greninja in the Miraidon deck or Radiant Serena in the Lugia deck. If you just trap that with a Mawile, say they started or they benched it at some point, that could just be a game-winning condition for you. Additionally, it might just be able to stall out an opponent's Pokemon, like a Mew in the Gardevoir deck or a Radiant Greninja, just while you're setting up your board and getting Colresses and getting things in the Lost Zone. And then when you have a perfect board state, then you just go swinging with all your main attackers. So Mawile, really nice inclusion, really fits nicely with this deck. Additionally, Miltank is another strategy. This is going to be great against those Arceus-based decks. Of course, if they play the Duraludon Vmax, then you're going to have a hard time. But Miltank, kind of cool, and it can be really great against things like Miraidon that, frankly, don't have a one-prize attacker. So I like those inclusions as well. Would I expect them to be the norm moving forward? Yes and no. Maybe one, maybe the Mawile or the Miltank. Maybe not both. Now that people know this list, might be a little bit more prepared in this type of matchup for those cards. So I imagine that Pedro probably got a lot of wins where his opponent didn't know that he had Miltank in their deck and they didn't set up a non-V attacker. So that is kind of my thought there. I think this list is still very, very strong. Obviously, Radiant Charizard is my preferred way to build Lost Box right now. So congrats to Pedro on his top 4 finish. Great list. Coming in third place was Pablo Meza. Another strong run by Pablo. Been playing a long time. And I, frankly, was rooting for him to make the finals, but a couple of bricks in his top 4 matchup against Tord with his Gardevoir deck just meant that his run stopped in top 4. But a really nice finish for Pablo with his Mew deck. This is just straightforward and very, very consistent. Of course, the whole strategy revolves around this Mew Vmax. You're going to be swinging for 190 at the very least with copying the Technoblast on the Genesect V. Mew Vmax been a deck for as long as it's been released. Been a really good deck for as long as it's been released. One of the cool things about Pablo's deck is that he really leaned into the Path of the Peak strategy more so than any other Mew Vmax list before it. He played 4 Path of the Peak. 4 Path of the Peak. Path of the Peak shuts down your own abilities. It shuts down Genesect, which is your entire draw engine. And Pablo opted to play 4. It seems counterintuitive, but what you want to do, especially in the Lugia matchup, especially in the Gardevoir matchup, even in matchups like Miraidon, a lot of decks really rely on those early abilities or late game, frankly, abilities throughout the entire game. So you want to make sure that when you need the path, you always have it in hand. Now, to counteract that Path of the Peak play, for you, right? Because you want to be drawing cards. You want to play path, deny your opponent, and then come back to your turn and draw cards. Pablo opted to play the 4 count of Lost Vacuum. Now, Lost Vacuum is an item card. Choose a Pokemon tool attached to any Pokemon or any stadium in play and put it into the Lost Zone. So, a really nice card to play your Path of the Peak. Your opponent hopefully passes because they can't do anything because they can't use their abilities. And then you Lost Vacuum that stadium away. So, a really great strategy here. We see that from Pablo with this kind of unique 4 path, 4 vacuum. I don't love the 4 path for me personally. I think 3 is perfect, but I do really, really love the 4 Lost Vacuum because there are a lot of tools and a lot of opponent stadiums that can be really tricky to get around. I think of Temple of Sinnoh. I think of the 4 Seal Stones, maybe in Mirror. I think of just the Choice Belt. I think of a lot of different cards that are just good to have Lost Vacuum to get rid of, right? So Lost Vacuum as a 4 count, I think that is amazing. 4 Path of the Peak, I'm not as sold on, but I understand the logic there. One other card that is very important to point out from Pablo's list is the Fan of Waves. This deck has a hard time if Lugia pops off, and particularly if Lugia pops off and attaches a gift energy to their main attacker. If that's the case, then you can't judge them or Roxanne them out of good cards because you'll judge Roxanne, whatever, disrupt their hand, and then you'll take a knockout, and of course they're going to draw with the gift energy. So you need to be able to put a fan out into play, be able to remove one of their energy, preferably, again, that gift energy, and then Roxanne them, and then take the knockout, and in that way they're left with 3 cards. Hopefully can't formulate another strategy. So that is the reasoning behind this Fan of Waves. Really great list. Love this list by Pablo. Super straightforward, super consistent. Should be the way we play Mew going forward with that heavy path, heavy vacuum combo. Coming in at number 2, the finalist from EUIC is Tord Reklev. I just want to say I am in love with this deck. This is so fun. Really the best way that I can think of to play Gardevoir. I've been fishbowling hands all day, and coming up with these crazy turn 2 strategies. The thing that I love about his list is that it's going to be all consistency all the time. You see the 4 Professor's Research, not a card that you see from a lot of Gardevoir lists because they want to be, you know, saving their resources. They want to be kind of holding on to everything and amassing a huge hand. Now you can amass a huge hand with this deck, but you also really want to see Professor's Research in your opening hand so that you can dig a little bit farther, find your battle VIP passes, find your level balls and your fog crystals to get moving and get your board set up, because that was the deck's biggest flaw. Heading into EUIC, a lot of players wrote off Gardevoir because it was a little bit too inconsistent, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of the players that wrote off Gardevoir as being too inconsistent probably didn't play the 4 count, the max count of the best draw supporter we have in the format right now. So just want to point that out. If you're playing 3, maybe even 2 Professor's Research, consider that. Really consider whether or not it's worth it to do that. The other thing about his list that I am impressed with is there is no Mewtwo V Union. Mewtwo V Union is a massive Pokemon, has some great attacks. You see a lot of other lists play it, but it's not necessary. It really isn't, you guys, because at the time that you get the Mewtwo V Union up, your opponent's probably taken 3, 4, maybe even 5 prizes, and they just need to find another Gust to take a knockout on something on the bench. So I am not the biggest fan of Mewtwo V Union. I don't think it gives you the kind of control over the game that you need it to give you at that point. So Tor just went, you know what? I'm not going to deal with it. Not even going to worry about getting that Mewtwo out on the board. And I'm going to go with straight consistency. Another card that I like, speaking of consistency, is the Lumineon V. This should be another card that will be standardized in Gardevoir because you're playing so many one-of supporters that you need to have on the turn that you need them. For instance, the Miriam, which is a new card from the Scarlet and Violet set, allows you to shuffle up Pokemon from your discard pile and draw 3 cards. Well, on the turn that, let's say your Gardevoir EX got knocked out and you need another Gardevoir EX this turn to attack, well, yeah, I want to be able to find that Miriam on that turn that I need it. Additionally, things like only playing 1 Boss's Orders. Yeah, I'm going to want to find that single copy of Boss's Orders on that turn that I need it. One thing about Gardevoir is it can smash right through anything in its way, but when you need these tech supporters, the Roxanne, the Miriam, the Boss's Orders, it's really nice to be able to fish them out with Lumineon. Overall, love the list. I think it's awesome. Really great concept for Gardevoir EX. I'm a big fan of the 4 Research. I'm a big fan of the Pokemon lineup. I'm a fairly big fan of the trainer lineup. And overall, just a really solid deck for the meta. Now, of course, he ran into a wall in Alex Szymanski playing a big counter deck. There are a few ways to get around the Alolan Vulpix. One of the best ways that I can think of is the Mimikyu EX, which is a cute little card that does 30 times the amount of energy attached to both active Pokemon. So you can load that Mimikyu EX up and swing for big damage. It doesn't have an ability, so you don't have to worry about Vulpix. It's just a way to one-shot the opposing Vulpix. Another card that I've been seeing floating around a little bit is the Drifloon that would do 180 damage for 3 energy, of course, damaging yourself with that Gardevoir EX. So those are a couple options if you're worried about the Alolan Vulpix. Otherwise, I think this list is really, really tight. Great list. Every card is perfectly in place, and Tord made a phenomenal run with this new archetype. And last but not least, our finalist, Alex Szymanski, playing his Arceus Vstar Duraludon Vmax deck. Arceus Vstar been in the format a long time. Trinity Nova, just a very solid attack, 200 damage for 3 energy. Of course, you're probably going to be attaching a double turbo to that, so 180 for 3 energy, more than likely. And then the ability Starbirth to be able to fetch out anything that you need from your deck when you need it. The Duraludon Vmax is the primary backup attacker, just has a lot of HP, and again, can go through anything that your opponent might try to set up, like a Miltank, for instance. But 220 damage, you're going to be two-shotting anything, and potentially one-shotting your opponent's unevolved Pokemon V. Also plays a couple of Drapion V, which not only is good in the Mew matchup, but is quite good against Gardevoir EX. That Gardevoir having the Dark Weakness, so you can manually power up this Drapion in that matchup to swing for one-hit KOs. We also have a 1/1 Alolan Vulpix V-Star line, so the Snow Mirage attack does 160 damage. This attack's damage isn't affected by any effects of your opponent's active Pokemon, and then during your next turn from your opponent, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from Pokemon that have abilities. So think about Lugia. Think about Gardevoir. These are some of the main decks that play abilities. I mean, even think about Lost Box, right? Like Cramorants can't attack through you. Radiant Charizard can't attack you. Like, there are just a ton of Pokemon with abilities right now. And Alolan Vulpix, while it's not the greatest in every matchup, it's still pretty good in a lot of them. So a 1-1 Alolan Vulpix, I could honestly see this line being bumped up to maybe even a 2-1 or a 2-2, just because of how important it is against decks like Gardevoir, how important it is against decks like Lugia. This is a cute little card here. I like it a lot. And again, it's perfect for this exact metagame. If the metagame shifts away from Guardy, maybe more towards Mew Vmax, for instance, this card is going to lose a lot of its power. But as of right now, where we're seeing, high amounts of Guardy, we're seeing high amounts of Lugia being played, I think it was the perfect counter choice for this tournament. Overall, just a great list from Alex, and congratulations to him for winning with an Arceus deck that, if you would have showed me this before the tournament, I would have said, well, there's not really an engine. You're not really drawing that many cards every turn. You're kind of relying on just having your opening Arceus Vstar powering up an attacker and that getting you there. But obviously it worked. Congratulations to Alex on his top placement at EUIC. Very unique list. So that is the rundown of the top 8 decks from EUIC. Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. Was there a deck that you wished had made top 8 that didn't? Was there a deck that made top 8 that made a run that you didn't think it should have made? Let me know in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. That's going to do it for me today, guys. God bless. If I don't see you soon, I'll see you later. And remember, good luck and also have fun.